morning and welcome everyone. I'm Corey Robinson Rosenberg, and professor of pediatrics and psychiatry here at the School of Medicine, CU School of Medicine. Welcome to CANDO. We're in our 10th year now, or 9th, I guess, that CANDO was set up coming out of the Autism Commission, Governor Ritter's Autism Commission, and out of that commission, a 10-year strategic plan was developed, and we began with hosting DD Council. We're able to form an ad hoc committee of the Development Disability Council. So the last 10 years, or 9 years, we've been holding these quarterly meetings with presentations on different issues impacting not just people with autism, but all of neurodevelopmental disabilities. And that's what our agenda is about this morning. Historically, we've, when it's been legislative season, we've generally started the meeting off with a legislative update. And then today, Michelle Craig and others from Healthcare Policy and Finance are with us to give us updates on what's happening with the CHIRP waiver and people's opportunities to give public input on those changes. And then wrapping up the morning, Joelle Bruner and Bob Lawhead here from the Colorado Developmental Disabilities Council talking about the council's strategic plan and particularly the Office of Employment First. So again, welcome. We have a number of people online as well, and we welcome folks there as well, and they know how they're able to ask questions. And generally speaking, we, at the end of each presentation, we go ahead and take questions, time permitting. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Cristiano Sosa up to the podium to give us an update on what's happening in this legislative session. Thanks, Cristiano. Thank you.
And the PowerPoint's a little bit out of order for me, but that's okay. How is everyone?
How are you?
Okay, great. It's Friday. It is spring. There's a lot to look forward to. And thank you for having me today. We're tracking a lot at the ARC of Colorado.
Sorry, Cristiano.
No problem.
I can't find you for some reason. I have to go back.
No worries.
That's not you.
Does anybody know it's Mercury in retrograde right now? Yeah, and Mercury in retrograde is supposed to really affect technology in communications. And we've certainly helped that, or at least I have personally. Thank you again for, how do you advance? So in terms of the legislative update, I thought I would start kind of up here and then funnel down a little bit to the roster of bills that we're currently tracking. When we talk about public policy at the ARC of Colorado, we're not just talking about the legislative session and all of the bills that kind of fly over the transom. We're also talking about the 32 committees that the ARC of Colorado sits on, our work with HCPF, our work in the long bill that you may not see actual legislation, but budget maneuvers. And the way that we develop our public policy agenda is there are 15 chapters of the ARC throughout the state, and they all provide input into what our priorities are. We listen to our constituents, our communities, our partners like Disability Law, CCDC, the council, to see where they're at in their legislative agenda. And we really try to be additive or to work with folks. And that's kind of the broad, big picture. Of course, the legislative session is really a sprint from January to May, and sucks up a lot of the energy. So that's just sort of the nuts and bolts. That's fine. So in terms of just kind of the political realities, at least from my perspective at the ARC of Colorado, is there is a number of bills that have come through, and they came through really, really fast. We have a trifecta of Democrats. So we have a House, we have a Senate, and we have a governor that's all Democratic. And you would think, wow, they would be coordinating with each other in a great way, but we really haven't seen that yet. I think it's getting a little bit better. Frankly, there's a lot of competition. When I talk about competition, I'm talking about this third bullet point, all-day kindergarten. And we are in support of all-day kindergarten because we really think that it provides those critical early intervention services, and it can ID folks, and it really has an economic benefit, and I can go on and on. But the price tag is $185 million, which doesn't leave much left for what I say is a logjam of bills given split chambers that we're like, ooh, this is our year to get that through, right? So there's a lot of big ticket items like the family leave and many other things that are just kind of sitting in appropriations. JBC finalized their recommendations on the budget this week. And so now they know what is left, and it's about 40 million or so for those bills that are sitting in appropriations. And there's a lot of them. IDD did fare well in the long bill or JBC figure setting. We're looking at 150 DD comp slots this year on that wait list of 3,000, which is fantastic. Bob and Joelle will talk to you about the Employment First carve out that was in the figure setting. So those are two really big items for us, absolutely. And there's a new process with the JBC in that, yeah, they go through figure setting, they make the recommendations, but they're really having the legislators duke it out in the well in terms of running the legislation that will correspond to those figure settings. So in years past, many JBC members, and by the way, I'm sorry about the acronyms, JBC is a Joint Budget Committee, in case that's helpful, that they would carve out those dollars and then they would run the bill themselves as a JBC bill. They're not really doing that this year. So our legislative issues are pretty consistent from year to year. We work with our partners at HCPF in terms of policy, Medicaid, state programs, and there's a whole subset under this bucket, and you can find that on our website at the ARC of Colorado. We always have our eye on education as well. The legal rights and supports in least restrictive environments. And just like this bucket, there's lots of sub priorities here. And we are a civil rights organization at our heart. We're a human rights, civil rights organization for people with IDD. And again, there's more specifics on our website in terms of these buckets. Yeah?
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me? Yes.
Mhm.
There's a question online. Is there work on the ARC side for the refunding of the Autism Cares Act?
Autism.
Should we wait
Yeah.
for a moment? Okay.
We'll wait until you're done.
Yeah, I think that's helpful.
Okay.
Sure. Ways to get involved, just to stay on top of the bills that come through. It's a really busy time. The absolute best way is to go to our website, sign up to receive action alerts. This is a great way for you because it helps us by zip code so that we can send you the legislator that you need to talk to. And you can do it. We make it really easy through Facebook, through Twitter, through email, through phone calls, through writing, lots of different ways. And this is also another opportunity to tell your story. So what we're trying to do is collect stories as well. So when I'm tromping around at the Capitol, I can say, you know what? There is somebody in your district that is struggling with mental health issues, and this is what it looks like. Of course, holding that anonymity and all of that. But I find it really helpful with those legislators if they can point to specific cases that are within their district. So I encourage all of you to sign up for this because it really lifts up the collective of the whole. And sorry guys, I'm just kind of all over the place on this one. So where are we? We're tracking actually 84 bills right now. Our public policy call was last night, but I produced this in advance. About 33% of those are support, some level of support, strong support, passive support. Another roughly 2/3 or so, we're in that monitor position. We had some priorities at the outset of the year, and those priorities, one is a long game for us, which is about the wait list, and really ratcheting that down. We had 3,000 flags at our IDD luncheon a few weeks ago is a visual representation of that, so that when legislators came into that luncheon, they were able to see 3,000 flags representing people waiting to get a DD resource. And that's a long game. We're gonna work year over year to kind of ratchet that down. The other one is really in coalition with disability law. So our second priority is about competency to proceed in the criminal justice system. We supported that with them last year. It was filibustered on the last day of session. So we're looking at a trio of 3 bills. One is looking to develop a strategic plan to keep folks with mental health issues, co-occurring issues out of the criminal justice system, provide treatment for those that are in, that is not jail-based treatment, but community-based treatments. And we had to wait to introduce those bills until the settlement from a previous lawsuit was settled, and it was. For 16 million, now those bills are going to show up on our tracker. The other thing that we were looking at, which was legislation that did not pass last year, was about regulations in host homes in terms of basic fire, health, and safety. Working with our partners at HCPF, we're able to do that through rules. So we're looking forward to working with you all on that. And then the last big priority is about expulsions and suspensions pre-K through 2nd grade. Yeah, I went and I provided testimony on that last week. It is looking good. We found a Republican co-sponsor on that. That is a partisan issue in years past. But I mentioned earlier, we do have a trifecta, right? So I think this is something that we will definitely see, hopefully, knock on wood, come into fruition this year. Of our monitor bills, to date, 3 have been signed or sent to the governor. 7 of those have perished. In our support category, 4 bills have been signed or sent to the governor, and 3 have not. In terms of our opposed bills, all of them have died, which is great. And I don't know if you have the list in front of you in terms of what these categories are, but I'm happy to just kind of highlight just a few, particularly in our support category. I just mentioned the school discipline bill. This is the expulsions and suspensions. That is House Bill 1194. There's not a huge fiscal note on that. So that's the other, I think, political reality, is if there are large fiscal notes on bills, they're just been kind of sitting in appropriations. We don't think this one, well, this one won't be sitting in appropriations because there's not that fiscal note, which is fantastic. Another one that I would like to highlight is the Office of Public Guardianship. This was a bill that was introduced a couple of years ago to establish some pilots around the state in terms of guardianship options. And really looking at that supported decision-making component first, but really that provider of sort of last resort. Unfortunately, given the fiscal realities, it looks like we may need to pare that back and have that more focused on the Metro Denver area, but get some staff into the state to have that function for people who do not have family, friends, or other guardianship options. Another bill I would highlight, and it's sort of procedural, but I think it's important, is the House Bill 1910-63. This is about at-risk sharing between county departments. So really between CPS and APS, Child Protective Services, Adult Protective Services. I'm trying to be better with my acronyms. You know, with this bill, it would, the high level, stop the need to get a court order to get information for somebody who's walking down the hallway to have the case file as people transition from the CPS system to the APS system. There's another really interesting bill that we're supporting, which is about demographic notes for certain legislative bills. That's HB 19-1184. Just like the analysts, when a bill is drafted, they have to develop a fiscal note to see what that costs. What this does is it says, well, what is the impact of this bill on certain demographic folks within the state? So underserved communities, people of color, IDD, disability. I think it's an interesting bill, and it's certainly one for us to watch to see what those unintended consequences might be in terms of potential legislation. We have supported HB 19-1147, which is about revising the traumatic brain injury program and really taking the word traumatic out of there because brain injury is brain injury, and it really opens up the definition for better coordination and service. So that's just a few of the 26 in the support, and as I told you, there's several that are going to come into the strong support category after the settlement. We did oppose, and although it's in the monitor category, Where is that? It was about the Guardianship Bill of Rights. And we just didn't feel that that was quite prime time yet. Existing Colorado statute really spells out a lot of that work, which we think is absolutely critical. That any Bill of Rights would support what's kind of currently in statute, and we feel that what's in statute is a little more robust than what was presented. So we hope to work with the stakeholders and partners over the summer and maybe go back at that one again next year. So there's a lot going on. It's been a great, fun session. It's been a frenetic session. Again, sign up for advocacy alerts. If you do want to testify on bills or provide stories, let me know. It is just so impactful. And we really work with you at the ARC of Colorado staff to craft that testimony and make sure that you feel supported as you go into that building to testify. I know many of you in the room have done that before, but it can be a little intimidating if you haven't done that before. And that's what we're here for, is to help you in that process if you would like to do that. So I am going to open it up for questions. Start in the back.
Mute the mic. Okay, who had their hands up back here?
So, it is okay. So regarding the 150 additional waivers on the wait list of 3,000. Currently, there are 16,000 students in the school system with autism. Every year for the next 20 years, you will need to add 500 additional waivers to keep up with those graduating classes. Can you explain how 150 is evaluated as, you said, fantastic? And do you need help crafting a bill that says for the next 20 years, we need 500 additional waivers to the Medicaid system for the adults on the autism spectrum?
Well, we currently have about 3,000 people on the wait list. So when I say fantastic, you know, last year we were able to release 300, and this year it's 150. As I said, it's and you know, I hear you. The need for the services continue to grow, and I wish that that wasn't the case. We will be working to reduce that over the years. HICCLUF does have or has developed a plan to look at that. I think it's over about 10 years or so to see what the cost would be and how many would come off given what that current reality is. I'm happy to give you a card and talk about this further with you. Yes.
I'm too old to actually have a question, but I just wanted to comment that I have been inspired by this presentation. I'm kind of an outsider. I'm not that familiar with ARC, but I think it is a sign of an enlightened society to have something like what you do, to work with the government to advocate for this population. Not that long ago, there were governments that wanted to basically kill everybody in this category, thinking about Nazi Germany, for example. And to go from there to seeing this is just a wonderful thing. So thank you for what you're doing. Of course, it's not enough and never enough, but I think it is very impressive.
Well, thank you. You know, the Arc of Colorado is only as strong as our 14 chapters throughout the state. And those are largely made up of parents, family members, people with IDD. It's a privilege and an honor to work in that space. So thank you for that. Can't do it without you.
Hi, I'm a mother of a kid on the spectrum, and I'm a little bit new to the CANDO thing, so I don't know whether I feel like there's a lot of organizations, so my question may be geared towards multiple organizations, and you're just the one up here right now going to be answering it. I'm looking at the CANDO, or the Colorado Autism Commission report that had, I believe, 18 strategic things that needed to be done for autism specifically. And what really concerns me is the education portion of it. There are several things in the education portion that I feel like that the report says should be done by 2012 and 2016. I don't think any of them have been done. And my big concern is our children are being abused in schools disproportionately. The United States Department of Education did a recent study that showed our children are 11 to 12% of the population and up to 75% of the kids being abused in schools. Our kids are being secluded and they're being restrained. I have a friend who just interviewed at a school for special ed. They were asking her questions like, if in this situation and this kid got aggressive or agitated, what would you do? And she was like thinking of answers about how to kind of figure out what was the cause and how to best work with the kid to relax him. And they repeatedly said to her, no, you just restrain him. No, you just restrain him. And she's like, what the hell? Are you kidding me? I have friends that have pulled their kids from schools because they lock their kid in a padded room all day in high-end schools around the city. And I feel like this organization should be focusing on doing things. And I hear you saying monitoring, or watching, and we're monitoring, but I don't feel like you're doing anything. And I feel like our kids are being abused in schools. Our kids are not getting services when they get out of schools, and families are paying for everything, including myself. My kid is not in school for this reason. And I want to know why nothing has been done, why the establishment of a statewide teacher training system for all educators and staff to deal with our children hasn't even been touched at all, ever. And it was supposed to have been done in 2012.
Well, I might have to lean into some of our friends who have developed the 10-year plan, and I can speak specifically to the ARC and our supportive role and efforts. When I talk about some of these bills, a lot of the bills that we track, that we support, that we oppose, are sort of reactive in a sense that they're introduced. Then we work with the sponsors, the legislators, the people who are working with them to create language, draft language that really fits for the IDD space. Given the limited staff of the ARC of Colorado, we have 3 folks. We prioritize about 5 things each year. And in terms of school, it is around the expulsions and suspensions, because we feel early in a child's career, having the right supports, the behavior ABA, alternatives, is absolutely critical and important downstream. Now, I'm going to lob it over to, we're not in charge of the 10-year strategic plan. Yes.
Good morning. My name is Joelle Bruner, and I'm the Executive Director of Colorado's Developmental Disabilities Council. And what I hear when I hear your questions are several things. One is a complete sense of urgency. Like, all right, enough of this happy talk. We have a situation that merits serious and ongoing attention. And so I wanted to recognize the urgency and the personal knowledge and experience behind it. I came to Colorado 5 years ago, and I noticed a couple of things. Um, I think it's important to look at not only the spectrum from birth to the end of life, because when I say that this is a long-term movement, so you've got a couple of things. You've got a disability rights movement with a philosophy and a civil rights and a human rights aim. You've got a policy movement that hopefully will complement that. And you've got systems that are slower to move, that incorporate legacy notions of what is acceptable, some more modern notions, and some, for lack of a better phrase, progressive notions. And all of those things have to work together along with someone's network. And by saying that each of these groups, the Developmental Disabilities Council, the ARC of Colorado, Disability Law Colorado, JFK Partners should not do more. No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that looking at that whole undulating animal of the way that those things interact and intersect may help. I learned something about Colorado in coming here. Local control is a real factor in what happens in the schools. So for example, there are 178 school districts and BOCES in the state. My understanding is that the Colorado Department of Education is a little bit like a weak mayor in a strong council system, where it doesn't have the legislative authority to. It has influence, it has a role, but it doesn't have the overarching authority to do a training that would affect all 178 BOCES and school districts. I'm mentioning that only because I'm not saying it's right. Right.
So the monitoring and looking at the monitoring and looking at the monitoring and the looking at it is not working. I mean, last year there was a bill to declare autism an epidemic in the state of Colorado, which would have given the state emergency federal funding. That would have given us a lot of funding to do a lot of stuff for our kids on the spectrum. Where was all the support? Where was CANDO for that?
You know, I'm going to give it to Corey, who's been with CANDO since the beginning.
Thank you, and thank you for going into the report. A couple things, and this is Corey Robinson. The CANDO has no funding. So with the Autism Commission report came out right at the point of the recession, and nothing was being funded. We basically said, but we do want to keep attention on issues, and so have continued to meet. The education objectives that were in the plan, one had to do, which was accomplished, had to do with how autism is defined for educational purposes. And while it's a very administrative accomplishment, it was really important to for access to services in education. I want to pick up on two things. There's certainly a lot in what you brought up with respect to the issue of seclusion and restraint. The DD Council, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, did provide some funding to disability law, because one of the things in Colorado, there's actually a bill, or there's a requirement that schools keep track of instances of seclusion and restraint, but there's no mechanism. So CDE collects this information, but there's no mechanism for reporting it out. So the DD Council did fund disability law to go in and take a look at that issue, and I'm sure there's reporting on that. But the other thing, with respect to seclusion and restraint, we did have a CANDO meeting where Sarah Davidon reported out on work she had done in conjunction for her dissertation, looking at regulations around instances of seclusion and restraint. It's a huge issue, and it definitely needs better education of educators, for sure. You can, so that, you know, if you've been on the CANDO website, you know we archive all of these meetings. So the December 9th, 2016 meeting had a presentation on that. With respect to the epidemic bill, there was no federal funding that was guaranteed to come as a result of the epidemic bill, autism as an epidemic bill. There were there was significant reaction from people with autism to that bill, largely based upon the name, epidemic, and they felt what they argued was that that was very stigmatizing. There were certainly people who supported it. Okay, so
it's not a disease.
And
Epidemic doesn't mean a disease.
okay, and you know, like Cristiano said, I'm happy to talk more, but I did want to at least make the point that yes, seclusion and restraint as an issue is on the advocacy wavelength. There is a bill.
It's in our public policy agenda.
I hear your concern, and so my name is Heather Peters, and I work for Advocacy Denver. So Advocacy Denver is just a chapter, just a piece of the arc and I support kiddos in Denver public schools. So it sounds like, do you live in Denver public schools area? Oh, okay. So I support kiddos there, and it's a huge issue. It's not okay. Nothing about it is okay. And so I used to work for Denver Public Schools, and now I realized how big of a problem it is and how much I want to do it. And I have my dream job now, working for Advocacy Denver, and I get to stand up and help. And so what we're doing about it is we have meetings once a month with Denver Public Schools and talk to their discipline people, but specifically we're working on, unfortunately, I'm going to bring it to the next level of handcuffs, and we're putting children in handcuffs, and a lot of them are on the spectrum or have disabilities, right? They're trauma kiddos, or they have disabilities, and so we're working with that because they have safety and security in schools, and they'll even have them in elementary schools, and they might not be trained, and we've heard all kinds of things about the reasons why they're put in school systems and now out patrolling on the street. So there's different theories there, but it is an issue specifically I can talk about in Denver Public Schools, and that we are advocating and trying to change things that they do with trainings, like you were talking about before, about how the teachers are reacting about inclusion and talking about more inclusive practices, but making sure that they have the supports that they need. So really working specifically with the schools and kind of getting, most of us have worked for Denver Public Schools in Advocacy Denver, and so we know a lot of the players, and so we work specifically with trying to facilitate change within the district and within that. So the rest is
yeah, I think you bring up a good point. There are chapters throughout the state who are the boots on the ground, those advocates who can work with the schools, work with the parents, work with the IEP program, work with the kiddo in that specific context and environment. I think when we look at this, you highlighted it, there's lots of moving parts in terms of really moving the needle. Legislation is one. Sound public policy is another. Boots on the ground is another. Training, education, awareness. There's lots of supports that need to go into this to really lift that up.
So this is Joelle again from the DD Council, and I wanted to make a connection between what the 5-year plan is and what actions it is that the council has taken just recently to support change. So one is that we've funded a grant to train all school resource officers on de-escalation and nonviolent strategies to that may target people, both people of color or at-risk populations, for cultural and linguistic competency, and also people on the spectrum disproportionately represented in the seclusion, restraint, and expulsion, and shown specific strategies from a former school resource officer to teach people about disability and about de-escalation. So that training has happened in multiple locations statewide. Another thing that we did is we funded a grant with Ability Connection Colorado to train families in positive behavioral support, and that also included some grandparents and other people, and largely our focus is on positive behavioral support and bringing that information to different audiences. We have had meetings with teachers in school districts when that is possible, to also promote those kind of strategies. We don't believe in violence against the population that you're talking about or anyone. We don't believe in abuse, and we're trying to stop it. Those are just 2 examples.
We do have a couple questions online. The one from earlier was, is there work on the ARC side for the refunding of the Autism Cares Act?
So that's at the federal level. And so there's the ARC US that works on federal legislation. Of course we do too. We're gonna be going out with quite a few of the JFK partners and other folks in a couple of weeks for the disability policy seminar, where self-advocates, staff, Colorado contingent members will lobby their Congress people federally. We are in support.
And another question from Lisa Franklin. Thank you for your support of full day kindergarten. This opportunity will benefit all children, including those with developmental disabilities. A question about the early childhood suspension expulsion bill. Do you know when this will be in a Senate committee?
Probably next week. It just passed out of the House committee. It went to the floor. So next stop is the Senate chamber. Yep.
I just wanted to support that one aspect of the restraint, abuse, and those kinds of things is the reporting, especially restraint.
Mm-hmm.
My experience in working, with residential facilities, for example, is that if there's, we had a system. I don't want to explain what it was I was doing, but we had a system for reporting that was robust. Anybody could report any adverse incident at any time of any sort with a facility. Parents would report, staff workers would report, etc. And we had to review them all. And I reviewed many such reports. That process of reviewing and getting back with the facility was very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as we, focus on reducing congregate living situations and giving individuals a chance to live in the community, we have to start bringing the community up to the same standard that we held some of the congregate living situations to.
Mm-hmm.
That was one thing I had in mind. And the other thing is, I think an area that sounds like is not complete, although I have seen a lot of good and bad, is in how to actually manage individuals with autism or intellectual disabilities or what have you. What do you do? Well, there's a lot of things that you can do, and and the experts in the area know about all kinds of things, whether it's taught field therapy and various interventions of sorts. And these kinds of things, teachers have to become therapists of sorts, or supervisors when they have one-on-one supervision or whatever they set up in school. These people need to know how to manage this population. And I think there's probably a lot missing. It sounds like there's a lot missing in that area.
Well, and we see it in all aspects, right? Not just in education, but also criminal justice. Some of our chapters really specialize in working with police and first responders and, you know, hey, what are those de-escalation techniques? Maybe those flashing lights aren't really necessary as you're having the interview on the street. We see a lot of work, at least through the ARC chapters, in that criminal justice space as it relates to autism, certainly within the schools, providers, lots of areas. I appreciate your comments.
Great.
Yeah,
Thanks so
thank
much,
you.
Cristiano.
And I'm sorry, I have one quick question for you. And I'm sorry, I'll be brief. You said that all-day kinder was critical to get intervention services to these kids. Everybody I know that has either a preschooler or a kindergartner in the school system is getting a half an hour to 2 hours tops of services per week. What would all-day kinder do to help them? Doesn't give them more services, it just gives them more time in school. And they're not getting services. And I mean, I have friends who are struggling to keep the hour of services that they have for their kid. And so I'm thinking, well, who cares if they're there all day? They're only getting an hour a week anyway.
Well, our hope is with the full day kindergarten, especially in this first year as they're ramping up, there is additional dollars baked into this bill, is to support special education. So that there's more resources available as kiddos are in the classrooms longer. We are concerned, you know, we'd like to have, you know, one of the things that we've heard from some parents is that having that longer time in the classroom or in kindergarten really helps to provide some stability, familiarity, helps to reinforce positive behaviors if there is behavior plan or supports. So I hope that answers your question in part.
Thanks, Cristiano. Yeah. Okay. So now I'd like to introduce Michelle Craig and Justine from Healthcare Policy and Finance. One of the big changes that's going on in the landscape of services is changes to the CHIRP waiver. And they're prepared today to tell us about what's happening with that, get input, and tell about how to continue to give input on it. So Michelle and Justine.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Craig. I'm with the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing, and this is Justine Miracle. She's not going to introduce herself. We work at HCPF in the Complex Needs Program Development and Evaluation Unit, and one of the things we've been tasked with is working on some exciting changes to our Children's Habilitation Residential Program waiver. Is this?
No, that's fine. We're just going to take a quick look at this. I'm so sorry. So no, we're great.
Oh, that one. Okay.
We're good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Now I forgot what I was saying. So, the overview of what we're doing. So we've been working on implementing changes to the Children's Habilitation Residential Program waiver, otherwise known as CHIRP. And we wanted to come today and talk with you, as Corey said, about what those changes are, where we're at in the process, what we've done so far in terms of stakeholder engagement, and then additional ways to provide input. And of course, if you have any feedback for us today, would be great. Oh,
Oh, sorry. We've heard it so many times.
okay. You guys know our mission.
Fiscally responsible person.
Yes, right.
Centered stuff.
Yes. Okay. Next slide.
Not this one? You want
No,
this one?
we can go to the next one.
No, this one.
Okay, so we'll just jump right in because I know we're over a little bit of time here. So the department received authority through House Bill 1813-28 last legislative session to expand the CHIRP waiver to better serve children and youth with intellectual and developmental disability and complex support needs. So the way I've laid out the presentation today is to tell you kind of high level what the 4 major changes we're making, give you a little bit of background about what currently is in the CHIRP waiver for anybody who might not be familiar, so there's some context, and then what those changes are going to be, and then timelines for the changes. So the first one, and this has already happened, was transfer of the administration of the CHIRP waiver from the Colorado Department of Human Services to the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing. So that actually happened July 1 of 2018. Prior to that, the Department of Human Services had served as the operating agency for the waiver. It was our only remaining waiver that was not at the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing, so we were able to bring that over to Healthcare Policy and Financing, as well as Nancy Harris. If any of you are familiar with her, she's been the longtime CHIRP waiver administrator. She's at Healthcare Policy and Financing now. The next one is the removal of a requirement that the child be in foster care. So currently, the requirement for eligibility for the CHIRP waiver is that the child be part of the child welfare system, which means that families have had to make the decision to relinquish custody of their children in order to get the services that they need. We are also adding 2 new services to the CHIRP waiver that are really designed to support children and youth to stay in the family home when that's in the best interest of everybody in the home, rather than need out-of-home placement, or facilitate a return to the family home once a child is maybe stabilized and out-of-home placement. And then lastly, transfer of case management from child welfare agencies to case management agencies. So currently, the local county departments of human services provide or perform the case management activities for the waiver. We are going to transfer those to case management agencies, specifically community-centered boards to start, and then as we proceed with case management, conflict-free case management, there will be more case management agencies to do that. But those are the 4 major changes. Our timeline, so we had a very ambitious timeline that was associated with this bill. So we were directed to make all these changes to the CHIRP waiver and submit the waiver application to the federal government, to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, by March 31st, 2019. So the bill was effective July 1, 2018. We had to submit the redesigned waiver by March 31st, 2018. And I'm pleased to say that we did meet that deadline, actually a little bit in advance. We submitted the waiver application last week, so we're very excited about that. We engaged in a significant amount of stakeholder engagement starting in August all the way through last month. We're obviously going to continue to do that, but that was all the stakeholder engagement leading up to getting the information we needed to make the changes to the waiver that people thought would work, so we could get that submitted to CMS. So we've had, I think, roughly 6 or 7 various stakeholder engagement meetings about the new benefits, the overall changes to the CHIRP waiver, rule revisions, the assessment tool. And we've had a lot of really good engagement from people, and we're able to incorporate a good amount of the feedback that we received. Currently, what will happen now is we will probably get some questions back from CMS about the changes. They already know about the changes. We've talked to them. So it's not going to be any surprise, and we don't anticipate any real issues.
Say what CMS is.
I did say it, but
You
you can
did?
say it again. Mm-hmm.
Okay. No, it's okay. Center for Medicaid and Medicare.
Medicare, Medicaid.
Yeah, whatever.
So we also have to promulgate rules to bring our rules in alignment with the waiver. So we've started that process. We had a stakeholder engagement meeting in February on that, and then we actually now have started our formal public notice period, and we're going to our medical services board. We had a public rule review meeting last week. nobody attended, but there's still opportunity to give feedback. And at the end of the slide, and we can also bring them up if we need to, I have links to our stakeholder engagement page, our medical services board page, so you can get information about either attending the medical services board meeting to provide public comment. Justine's contact information will be there as well as mine. You can also just send any public comment you have directly to us as well. So then, and I think this I did neglect to say, the implementation date for all these changes will be July 1, 2019. So the waiver being approved and then the rules being approved. In the spring, and actually we'll start next month, is some pretty significant stakeholder outreach and education. So number one, training for case management agencies on the waiver, providing case management for the waiver, training for service agencies to provide services, education for families and youth, the education system, the medical community, pretty broad outreach. We're developing some promotional materials to have to make sure that we're getting this information broadly out into the community, so that when families are maybe at their doctor's office and they're struggling, or they're with their school counselor, somebody, making sure we're getting information about if families would need the service, how do they get that service without having to go through a lot of different channels. And then also just transitioning the children and youth who are currently served by the waiver to the new waiver. We don't anticipate any adverse effects or changes to the children who are currently receiving services. There's about 40. And the main change they're going to see is case management. Their services and none of that's going to change. And we've been working with those counties and case management agencies specifically to make sure that that transition in case management will be smooth for them. All right. I gave this presentation yesterday and realized that maybe some of these slides may be out of order, but these slides just kind of break down what I was talking about and a little bit more information. But this is the transfer of the direct waiver administration from the Department of Human Services to Healthcare Policy and Financing. These two slides break down the change in the waiver eligibility that we're proposing a little bit more in detail. So the current eligibility for the waiver is children and youth ages birth through 20 in the custody of the County Department of Human Social Services, be determined to have a developmental disability as determined by the respective community centered board, eligible for Social Security income, has extraordinary needs, residing in out-of-home care, and then meets the intermediate care facility for individuals with intellectual disabilities needs. So that's what's in there currently. Next slide is what we're changing it to. So it still will be children and youth ages birth 0 through 20. They still need to meet the developmental disability determination by the Community Service Board. We'll still need to meet the ICF IDD level of need criteria. That's pretty standard. That just means that someone has an institutional level of care need. But you can see we remove the requirement that they be in out-of-home placement or that they be in the custody of child welfare. And we've kept the extraordinary needs. They have to have extraordinary needs that put them at risk of or in need of out-of-home placement. And we've also removed the Social Security, the SSI, Social Security income financial criteria. So basically that means that a child doesn't have to be financially eligible for SSI to qualify for the waiver. If they do need out-of-home placement in a foster care home or a group home, they will need to apply for SSI simply to be able to have the money to pay room and board. But they overall don't have to be financially eligible for the waiver. Okay. So then moving quickly, and hopefully I'm not moving too quickly, I just know we have a small amount of time here. So the existing services in the CHIRP waiver, because we have such small utilization statewide on this waiver, I think not a lot of people are familiar with what the waiver offers. So currently, we have these services. One is a habilitation service, which is a residential 24-hour service, and that's where the child or youth would move out of the family home to out-of-home living environment. Respite services, supported community connections, and then 3 professional therapies: massage therapy, hippotherapy, or movement therapy, which for those of you familiar with the Children's Extensive Supports waiver, it's those same services are in that waiver as well. So we're keeping all of those services and we're adding 2 new services: intensive support and transition support. And these were the ones I mentioned at the beginning that are designed to help the children and you stay in the family home, hopefully prevent crisis, maybe be used in a crisis, or to support the child or youth to transition back to the family home. So then my next 2 slides go into some more detail on that. So we'll not just yet, we'll get into that in a minute, but I wanted to highlight too a change we're making to respite to better serve people. Currently, the respite service in CHIRP is only reimbursed on a per diem unit. That means daily. So if a family wanted to access respite, then the child would have to go out of home for a whole day, and that may not be in the best interest of the child. In some cases, that might be for planned respite or something, but we wanted to have some flexibility, and we heard that loud and clear from stakeholders as well. Also, what we heard loud and clear is that respite is a crucial piece to this. Like families being able to have respite is a really big component to helping families be successful. So we were able to add a 15-minute unit reimbursement for CHIRP, much like it is in a couple of our other waivers. So that means that a family can have respite either in their home, respite provider could come in and, take the child out into the community at whatever time works for them, or if maybe there's some planned respite needs over a weekend, you could also use the daily rate. Okay, so high level with our intensive support services. So again, like I said, it's really designed to prevent the need for out-of-home placement. The service may be utilized in maintaining stabilization, preventing crisis situations, or even implemented when there is a crisis situation to try to lessen that and prevent out-of-home living needs. So there are really 2 main components to this service. One is a wraparound facilitator, and this individual would be responsible for the development of a wraparound plan and monitoring that identifies the needs of the child, youth, and family to make sure all the supports are in place that they need. And yes, Justine will further elaborate.
So the idea with the wraparound facilitator is it's basically a coordinator of the coordinators. So what the wraparound facilitator is tasked with doing is getting in and getting to know the youth and family, because youth come with family in whatever form that works out to be. And then they really start to dive in and assess how the kiddo and the family function within each system that kids sort of become involved in when they have complex needs. And so that could potentially be child welfare in any capacity, like an open case or an actual out-of-home placement, because we want to make sure we're supporting those kids as well. And it could be, a more complex behavioral plan at the school. It could be juvenile justice involvement in some capacity, but then there's also just like OT and PT and all the other things that sort of all the services that come into a child's life the children that would qualify for these. So the wraparound facilitator would sort of be tasked with getting all of those providers around the table and coming up with a single plan that would address the family's needs. So one example that we heard was one kid was, having to go to science tutoring to fulfill one plan over here, and then science tutoring to fulfill one plan over here, but they didn't really know that wasn't really appropriate, but they're feeling really taxed.
It's that word.
It's that word? It's maybe it's because tax season is here. I have not done my taxes. But anyway, so they're just feeling really pulled trying to fulfill the needs of all these non-coordinated service plans. And so the idea is to get one plan for the family to work from and to just feel less pulled against all these systems that have different regulatory frameworks and whatnot. And it's not really putting the family in the middle of it anymore. It's sort of putting the wraparound facilitator in the middle of it. So this wraparound facilitator becomes an advocate, a coordinator of the coordinators, and seems to be really successful in places that provide the service. So here you go.
Excellent, thank you. And then the second component is an in-home support piece. So this is if a family chose, again, none of this is mandatory services, and it can also is designed to be used as a family needs it throughout the year. So the use of the service really can ebb and flow, and that's what we anticipate. But in-home support, to be able to have someone who would work with the child or youth on implementation of therapeutic or behavior support plans, building life skills, guidance and self-care, self-advocacy. Really, the idea is to let it be flexible based on the needs of the child or youth. What is it that they want to do, or if they want to learn, you know, life skills, adult skills. I'm totally stealing this from Carol, and hopefully that is she on the something she told me, and I had to, because you all know her. She had told me that was really helpful, that someone came in and helped her son learn to play solitaire. And that was really powerful for me, because those are just some of those life management things that we all maybe take for granted that can be really helpful. And so that's kind of one of the visual that I like to use when I talk about what this service is could really be tailored to whatever that child needs, and maybe focusing on the child and helping them learn some skills to give the parents some time to focus on supporting the other kids in the home to do the same thing.
Or making dinner.
Right, or making dinner. Okay, and then the transition support service has the same 3 components. The difference is that this service would start if a child were in out-of-home placement, out-of-home living environment, and they're ready to come back to the family home, that this wraparound facilitator would start while the child is still in the out-of-home living environment, and developing plans, pulling all those needs together to help that transition home be smooth. The in-home support obviously wouldn't start until the child returned to the family home, but the other component would. And this, we envision, could be used maybe either for the child from an out-of-home living environment to the family home, or even from our other, like if they were in a residential child care facility, maybe transitioning to a lesser restrictive environment like a group home to a foster care home, and I'll explain why I'm still using foster care home in a minute, and then back to the family home. So it could be used for all of that, just to help make sure those transitions are successful. All right, and I really meant in a minute that I get to the foster care home. So for purposes of today, I wanted to highlight our provider types for the residential service. So the current provider types in the waiver are a child placement agency, and then the child placement agency would either provide a group, whether it depends on what they do, but it would either be through a group home, group center, or a foster care home, a certified foster care home. We also permit certified foster care homes to enroll directly with Medicaid as providers, and we could pay them directly. A residential child care facility, or RCCF, or a kinship home. So obviously you could tell those are all child welfare living environments. When we started looking at what do we do for out-of-home living situations for kids without child welfare, which is what we're moving to, that was a pretty frightening thing to think about. Like, who is really going to make sure that these children and youth are safe? And in HCPF, it's Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing, we don't currently have a regulatory structure within like the Office of Community Living for kids living outside of the family home. We have it for adults, but we don't have it for kids. And looking at our time frame, we weren't sure that we had adequate time to make sure we put in adequate safety measures to keep kids safe while still being person-centered and maybe not going overboard. So we talked with our partners at the Colorado Department of Human Services, who have an existing regulatory structure. And what we decided is that, at least initially, we're going to use the regulatory structure of the Colorado Department of Human Services. So we will continue the same provider types. They will be licensed or certified through the process through the Colorado Department of Human Services, whether or not the child's in child welfare. So if a child does need out-of-home living environment, and maybe a foster care home is best, they could be living in a foster care home, but not actually be in foster care, if that makes sense. But we still have the same licensure requirements, regulatory structure to keep them safe. So that's what we're starting with. And then we're going to start analyzing too, how do we build a stronger regulatory structure within the Office of Community Living rules, and then who would survey to that. So that way we might move away from some of the foster care home language and all of that. But to start with, that's what we're doing. Yep. So proposed provider types will still be those 4 that I talked about. But as we were engaging stakeholders and talking to people about this, actually Larimer County and the Community Centered Board up there, Foothills Gateway, came to us with an additional provider type to consider as a way to build on some of their existing providers that they have success with. And that's adding a provider type called a Medicaid enrolled provider. So this provider type, and then we met with them, and because initially I thought, I'm not sure what you're proposing, but we met with them and thought, hey, I think this is a safe way to add an additional option. It doesn't mean that agencies have to do this, but it could be a good option. So I don't know if everybody's familiar with this, but we have 3 other waivers. Hi, Carol. 3 other waivers that provide services to adults and children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we have a provider type for those 3 waivers called a PASA. It's a program approved service agency. And we're really hoping to be able to tap into them to expand our provider base for CHIRP. Several of those PASAs are already CHIRP providers existing, but we wanted to expand them. So long story short, we're creating a provider type that's not necessarily a PASA, but that an agency who is certified as a PASA and is certified to provide residential services in our adult waiver for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They can be a provider type if it's the services provided in a foster care home certified by a local department, County Department of Human Services. So what Larimer County and Foothills Gateway proposed to us was a partnership of sorts, because Larimer County is very interested, as is all counties, in keeping children local, keeping families together, and then utilizing an existing provider base with some expertise to do that. A lot of our program approved service agencies may not want to become licensed child placement agencies because of some of the requirements of education level of management of staff. So this is a way to allow the counties and PASAs to partner to provide residential services. So the way it would work is, say maybe a PASA has what we currently call a host home, and they like to be able to serve a child, and they find a good match. And if the PASA wants to do that, then that host home would have to become certified by the county as a certified foster care home. So again, we're going around the state talking with agencies, local county departments of human services, talking with community-centered boards individually. And again, this isn't something that agencies have to do, it's just another possibility. So we have a variety of ways agencies could provide services. All right, and the last main change that I wanted to highlight is the change of case management function. So when we talk about case management, we're really talking about case management services specific to the waiver. So those are things like completing the 100.2 assessment, authorizing services, referral for services, making sure there's choice in services, development of the service plan, those types of things. So that's what we're separating out from the county departments of human services. So like I said, as of July 1, those functions will transfer to the community-centered boards to do. Currently, case management is done as an administrative case management service. We are transitioning that to be targeted case management, which means it's a state plan benefit, just like it is for our other 3 waivers for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And for anybody who's interested, it's the same 240 unit limit cap, same billing procedures, same requirements. It's the typical targeted case management requirements that case management agencies are already used to. If there happens to still be a child in child welfare and using CHIRP, which could be in the future, especially through the transition, any case management type responsibilities that come along with child welfare requirements, that still stays with the county, as well as eligibility. Some people have gotten a little confused about what's going over. Some people have thought eligibility goes over, but eligibility in terms of that initial Medicaid application, all of that still stays with the counties. Okay, and as I promised, we have some information, and I think we can probably send this PowerPoint out to people who want this.
I wasn't supposed to do. I clicked the link.
But we have a couple links where you could go to see more information about more detailed description of what the benefits are, more detailed description of the changes we're making in the waiver, some question and answer documents that we've compiled based on stakeholder feedback. So the first page is our Office of Community Living stakeholder page. And so we have two places. We have the Children's Habilitation Program waiver renewal. So that's where information is posted about all the changes we're making to the waiver itself. Oh, I guess there is only one.
There's,
Yeah,
there's
there's only
another
one.
like
Yes. We also have on here the benefits collaborative presentations and benefits draft statements that we did through some of our stakeholder meetings. I don't know, we should have the rules one up there, but I don't see it. We need to get that up there. So it looks like we may have some updating to do. I thought that was supposed to be up there, but that's where you'll find that.
The rule one is nice because I mean, if you like this sort of thing, but it's nice because it goes over the whole change of the waiver, whereas the benefit collaborative is really focused on those 2 new services. So it is a good presentation, and we'll make sure it gets up there soon. But just for everybody's sake, this is where all of OCL's stakeholder engagement opportunities are for our other happenings. So if you're interested, this is the link for that. And then do you want to go to Medical Services Board?
And then Medical Services Board. So here's information on how to participate in the Medical Services Board process. I was having some emails with Corey that there's still opportunity to give public comment. The public comment period for the waiver closed. We had a lot of good comments, and again, I think we're able to incorporate a lot of the things we've heard and little like nuances of things we missed, typos and whatnot. But then we're in the rulemaking process, so we did do a stakeholder engagement meeting on that, got some feedback, but it's still not too late. If you go in and take a look at the rules, and we'll show you where to find them, and you see something that you have a suggestion on, please feel free to email us. You can always come to Medical Services Board and provide public comment, and we welcome that. It also is super helpful if you can let us know as soon as you see something, because then hopefully we can just go in and make that change. And have time to, sometimes we need time to research what we can do. So you can click on all information here. It's kind of interesting. So click on public rule review meetings. And also if somebody wants a copy, maybe email me. Again, our contact information is email me or Justine, and we'll just send you a copy directly of the rules.
February.
It's March 18th, public rule review meeting. And then that's, even though my name's spelled wrong, I'm right at the top. And then that takes you right to the rules.
There's a lot of red here. Well, it's blue. They changed it to blue. When we did it, it was
it's red on our copies.
So.
Yes. Yeah, this is a little bit easier. And you'll see, I mean, we had to make some significant changes, like completely Xing out sections, taking out child welfare. But I think it's all good. And in the end, I think we're really excited. We've had a lot of positive feedback from the stakeholders. People are excited about this. I think even once this is implemented, we still have a lot of work to do to really operationalize this, provide technical assistance, evaluate if it's working, make changes. This is really a first step for us in making these changes, and then we're going to spend this next year evaluating and learning, and then figuring out, hey, what do we do next? And we already have some of those ideas, things that maybe weren't authorized, but we're mulling around for next steps, and also looking at how do we continue to improve this waiver and work very closely with the changes that our colleague Lindsay Westland is working on for the Children's Extensive Supports waiver. Okay. And then I think we're at the PowerPoint where we can look at questions.
So I have 3 questions online. The first one from Sarah Jackson Bonnell. It sounds like you are focusing on the wraparound program solely in your presentation. There have been several conversations around the START program being an approved model for CHIRP. Is that still being considered?
Yes. So what we decided to call this a wraparound facilitator. We had a couple iterations of what we would call that position, a coordinator. I don't remember. We had a lot of different iterations and finally landed on wraparound facilitator. The qualifications to be a wraparound facilitator actually allow for the START certification. So, and we've had that conversation. So Sarah, we have not changed course on that. It's just the title of the position, and like a wraparound plan is what we're calling it. But the provider qualifications, we believe, after consulting with the people who support the START intervention or START model, people who support the high fidelity wraparound model, and we think our qualifications are broad enough to allow agencies to choose which certification they want. So if they want to do through START, that would be great if that fits what they want to do, or high fidelity wraparound, or even the national wraparound program.
From Megan Cluth, what is the per unit reimbursement rate with the new change for respite?
Thank you. That's a great question. I do not have that yet. I'm actually, well, technically I do. What I can't do is I don't know if I can release it yet. I'm actually talking with rates because I get asked the same question about the 2 new services, and we have those. And I'm currently, I had some emails back and forth with our rates folks like, hey, when can we tell people what this is? It's kind of hard because we don't have a rate schedule out because these services aren't approved. So that's kind of where we're at. So last I heard, he's trying to, Scott he's working with his supervisor to figure out how we can say what that rate is. So we'll have to get back and figure out how to publish them. Okay. But I think they're fairly in line with some of our other services. But yeah.
Thank you. From Ann Carey, oops, it just scooted for me, sorry. Okay, from Ann Carey, what type of behavior support plans will be implemented under the waiver? What type?
It's just highly individualized. So I should clarify too that this waiver used to have behavioral services in it, but most of you I think are familiar that for children's services, behavioral services was moved into the state plan and should be covered there. So it's just an example. So a child may not have a behavior support plan, but if they had a behavior support plan, that in-home support professional could help implement that plan. I hope that answers it. What did you say the name was? Oh, if that doesn't fully answer it,
Ann Carey,
and if that doesn't fully answer it, let me know. But it's not that necessarily which behavior support plan. It's just that service is broad enough to allow if a child has one and is working through that position could, or that service could help implement that.
Wonderful. And then Ann says ABA question, PBS question.
It's again, I want to specify that it's not a behavioral service. It's just that, again, a staff providing that in-home support service could be trained by the ABA or whoever to implement that plan.
Here's Megan again. These are exciting changes, particularly the ability for PASTAs to get more involved. Thank you for all of your work on this. Do you have outreach plans to promote this more to encourage more respite providers that may not have been previously involved with this population?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things I talked about, we're doing a lot of stakeholder engagement, but we're also outreaching to a lot of our providers. So we're going out and we're meeting with service providers that are our typical PASAs. We're meeting with Foster Colorado. We're meeting with a lot of people trying to build that provider capacity. And hopefully, tentatively, I think it's the beginning of April, but we're working on even having a meeting just for potential interested providers to talk with us, either come in person or over webinar about what the services are, how to enroll, what it would entail, rates, all of that. So we'll continue to work on that well through implementation. And then in general, we have some plans for pretty broad stakeholder engagement up to July 1 and then after, with a variety of people to really make sure people are aware of this waiver and how to access it.
Quick question. Is
Yeah.
there a limited number of waivers?
Of enrollments?
Right.
Sure. There is not a wait list for this waiver. However, the legislation does authorize us to implement a wait list if we needed to due to fiscal reasons, like economic downturn or federal approval, something like that. But the plan is we want to continue to serve children and youth. So the waiver will have an unduplicated count limit. We have to do that. We will be monitoring that closely, and if it looks like we might exceed it, then we will explore our budget process to be able to continue to serve kids without a wait list as long as we can. Thank you.
Hi, I have a two-part question.
Sure.
Your presentation affects what you said, 40 people currently, and quote, 0 people showed up to the stakeholder process. Again, long-term planning here. There are 16,000 students with autism. I can get you 16,000 parents to care about your waiver programs, but we're not writing programs and spending time. I want the name of the person who cares about the 16,000. Do you know who that is at HCPF? Who is planning for them?
That's a great question and probably a broader question, but I think that's in general what we're doing for not only all children and all adults.
Okay, second part of the question.
Sure.
You did not give me a name. So no one in HCPF is planning by their role and position in staff for the 16,000. Got it. This whole meeting's about. We're ignoring them. We're not planning for the 16,000. Second part, who is monitoring the CCBs? My son is 15 with IDD. We just spent 3 months applying for one of these waivers. He was denied because he scored 76 and the cutoff is 70. He would qualify for autism. Again, 16,000 kids are in the wings needing these waivers. You're spending time on 40 kids. My kid got denied. He cannot live one day without 100% 24/7 supervision. The Autism Commission says, we're not asking for funding. So, okay, you had 10 years to ask for funding, and now I'm in your waiver group. I'm with HCPF. I have to depend on that waiver when I die for my kid. And we're denied. These CCBs are denying parents waivers. 16,000 kids are being denied waivers, and we care about the 40? The 40. Somebody, who is in charge of the CCBs? I'm letting you know they are denying waivers. If I die today, my kid has no income. And then what? Then he goes into foster care he'll be number 41? Is that when we care about him? Who is monitoring the CCBs at HCPF?
It's not the CCB.
Nobody knows. Okay, so all of this is a lot of talk and no action on the big problem. 16,000 kids not getting funding. And nobody can give me a name or an answer or when the funding will even be requested.
Right. I think, what is your name again?
My name is Pam.
Pam, if you could email me your contact information, I can send you the name of a person to maybe help you specifically look at your situation and that denial. And if there's other situations, if you can provide us, it's really helpful. Because it's one thing to hear that CCBs are denying, but if we can look into the individual situations, then we can see maybe what happened and what is the issue there and what we can fix. So we'll for sure do that. So I can give you that information. And then in terms of the 16,000 kids with autism in the school district, these changes are an effort to address this. I can't say that every single child would qualify for this particular waiver, but this is a step forward. So it's not just about caring for the 40 kids, it's actually about looking and planning for all those kids out there who need services or who are not getting them, who would qualify for this waiver. So HCPF in general, specifically the Office of Community Living, that is our goal. And I don't know, I can give you the name of our office director, Bonnie Silva, our interim office director, Bonnie Silva, and I'd be happy to connect you and she can reach out to you as well. But if you look at some of our long-term planning, in general, it's really what we're working towards is being able to provide better services, continually update, improve services for kids and adults. So I appreciate your contact and please connect with me and I will get you that contact information and we'll follow up on your specific situation.
We had one question here and then over there.
Sure.
She kind of took my question, but then added another one. So with the waivers, I was recently working with a friend who was also denied the waiver.
Mm-hmm.
My son is on the CES waiver.
Okay.
And she got an email from her CCB caseworker that said, the current reviewer of the files is actually not looking at all the criteria. He's only looking at the first one. And if you don't qualify, you're not getting the waiver, which to me sounds illegal. Who do we complain to?
We're actually working on that. And I'm not doing this in an effort to like spotlight Lindsay, but we've heard that feedback loud and clear and we're working on it. And in fact, Lindsay Westland, who's my colleague, is working on that, doing some stakeholder meetings to try to get feedback to change the application process. Not only the big amount of paper that's done, simplifying that, but then also taking that and working with our contractor who makes those reviews to make those changes. So the other thing I'll say again, like the denial, is if you have those type of specific issues where maybe EQ Health is the one we contract to do this, if there are specific issues that they're denying or you're hearing that they're not, I don't know, fully, looking what they need to, please let us know because then we need to take that action with our contractor and we will.
And what was Lindsay's last name?
It's Westland. And you can email me and I can forward you her email as well if that's easier.
And who are you?
I'm Justine. I'm the first one. She's so nice. She put me first.
It's not on my piece of paper.
But yeah, this is one of those things that I think is so crucial for families of all types because we can't address anything if we don't know what's happening. And if the data doesn't suggest any, if we're not looking at the data and seeing anything, that's what we have. All we have is your stories if we get to hear them, and then some data. So give us the stories and let us know, and we'll address them in any way that we possibly can. Like when you asked who cares about those 16 kids, 16,000, sorry, 16, sorry, I'm not good with numbers, but we definitely do. I mean, like there's 2 names up there that definitely do. So we care.
Hi, my name is Tiffany Banks. I work at Children's Hospital. And I just wanted to clarify, is my understanding that that 40 number, that's who's been able to access it in its current state. And so these changes are opening it up for more children to have access to it. And, you know, I think even if you've been denied for the current waivers, this is a new waiver that you can apply for starting July 1st. Is that correct? And so, the presentation and the 40 kids that they're talking about, that's not who is going to be affected by this opening up. Hopefully, this opening up is going to be able to help more people and have better access, because the fact that only 40 kids are able to access it in its current state, that was the atrocity. That was what we needed to change. And we're hoping, crossing my fingers, because I work with a lot of families that are counting on this waiver. Like, we are counting down the months here. And so I just wanted to clarify that, because I don't know, that's what I was thinking as you guys were asking some of those questions, is that hopefully your kids can access this waiver on July 1st. If you were denied the CES waiver previously because you need 20 and you still need 24-hour care, this waiver is supposed to be the waiver for you.
That's a great question. It's been difficult to try to get those numbers. So we've been talking with counties, community center boards who know some of the families to get the idea. We don't know for sure. We're anticipating or estimating probably doubling the waiver in the first year and then continued growth from there. Right. Well, and I think, sure. And I think that there's a lot of things to take into consideration. It's not just this waiver. We've got several other children's waivers. We've got our state plan benefits. There's a lot of different things that are being planned for. And so, again, like Justine said, we're doing a piece of this, and I think broadly, we can get you some information back. I don't have it handy, I apologize, but just about some of the long-term planning for children. And like I said, it's not just for children, it's for adults and planning for older adults. Like the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing is really looking at all of that. And Bonnie Silva, who's our acting director, I think probably if you're looking at general, if you want a name, that would be the name. I don't say that to throw my office director under the bus, but get a lot of emails. So that's why if you can contact me, I will talk with Bonnie, and then even in my supervisor Colin as well. Yes, I think to summarize, and if I don't summarize this well, please correct me. But I think, again, I think that the point was we weren't quite answering who's really looking out for these 16,000 kids. If this waiver, if we're only estimating doubling every year, we're still 16,000 kids with some needs. How is HCPF planning for that, and who is the person who is planning for that?
This is Carol Meredith. I was on the phone in the car, and I may have missed some of what Cristiano said as I was taking my 34-year-old son with autism to his work site. So I think it's really important, the stuff that you have brought up about the 16,000 kids. Autism has been an enigma within our system of care for the last 30 years that I've been trying to figure this out and trying to make it work. And so the commission was just one piece of that work that we were trying to get done. what we know now is that kids with autism are being identified more often than they were 30 years ago. I mean, I was lucky 30 years ago. Now more kids are being identified as being on the spectrum. And that spectrum is a very broad spectrum. So there are going to be some of these young kids and going into adulthood that are going to be just fine on the SLS waiver if we get adequate mental health supports in place to support them in a, dare I say it, wraparound type way. You know, some of these kids are going to be fine, are going to need the HCBS DD waiver with the currently 3,000 people on the as soon as available list. They are going to need that. And are we going to have that available at age 18 for everybody? No, we're not. Because Colorado is a local control state. We also have TABOR limits. There's a lot of politically complex things that go on that don't allow 16,000 people with a particular label to get prioritized in state government. And so I'd love to tell you that we're going to have a plan for 16,000 people in the next 4 years. We're working on it step by step by step by step, but it's not going to happen. Well, I've been working on it for 30 years. So Carol Meredith, you can put me down, carol@arc-ad.org. Corey and I have sat at her kitchen table with a variety of people for the last 15 years trying to figure out what's the next step. And that's part of the crisis intervention and prevention pilot work. It's part of the work we're doing on mental health initiatives. You know, when I first started, the CES waiver didn't exist. Then it had a wait list of thousands of kids. Now there's no wait list. There's no wait list for SLS. So we've made a lot of progress, but the number of people identified with this disorder has skyrocketed, and you know, the government systems are like, you know, battleships. They're like huge oil tankers, turning those systems quickly on a dime based on new diagnostic classifications that allow so many more people to come up with this label. It just doesn't happen on a dime. But I appreciate your urgency. I've been yelling about it since 1994.
And to kind of her point as well is that I am someone. My name is Sam Jarris. I sit at the Colorado Silk as well. I've applied for one of the board seats on CTDC and on a member of One Strong Voice with the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition. And I sit on 15 to 16 different committees working on these issues. I am on the spectrum. I have realized what kind of challenges there are here because I've suffered personally. And what I've recognized is not only, you know, the CDC's focus is on children, number of children diagnosed on the autism spectrum. We have to look at our society as a whole. You know, of the $200 million earmarked for autism research, less than 2% is focused on adult subjects. That is, you know, disproportionate, you know, disproportionately focused on children because I think our society is more focused on remediation than integration. So we need to take a holistic approach to autism spectrum disorder and to realize that we need to integrate people like myself into our society a lot more effectively. So to that point.
So, and